Hello, everybody. I'll welcome our today's speaker, Dr. Ramani. Dr. Ramani Gunatelika is an independent consultant and research associate at the International Center for Ethnic Studies, Colombo, and she specializes in the analysis of labor markets, income distribution, and the subjective well-being in Sri Lanka and the region. Her recent work focused on women's employment in Sri Lanka, skill deficits in Sri Lanka's manufacturing sector, subjective well-being in China, and migration and the distribution of consumption in fishing communities in Cambodia, India, and Sri Lanka. She is currently researching the factors associated with the demand for women workers in Sri Lanka's care economy, and the access to land and women's empowerment in Sri Lanka. I welcome ma'am. Over to you. Today, ma'am would be talking about women's employment in Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much. Now, do I share the screen? Yeah, okay. We'll get to that in a while. Yes, well, I would like to start by thanking you for inviting me. As you get older, the opportunities to have young people listen to you, they decline. So I am seizing this opportunity which has presented itself. I think as young scholars, what you will be interested in to hear are what we call case studies and empirical experiences, evidence, I think. So in my talk today, I am concentrating on that rather than theory and techniques, which I'm sure you know much more than I do, because as young people, you are far more, you are familiar with the new and advanced techniques, unlike myself. But of course, since I have been working a fair time in this field, I have a certain sort of, I have an overview of the area which maybe you don't have as yet. So I'm happy to share what I know with you, and I hope I will be able to stimulate you into thinking of new research areas and that kind of thing, because I think that is the one of the objectives of this exercise. Now let me try to, how do I need to share the screen, right?
Yes, there is a green button.
Right, a green thing. Okay. Now it's asking me.
So which tab do you want to share?
Okay, share, which I want to share. Okay, let's see that. Okay, share. Okay, can you see it?
On the way, yeah, yes. Maybe you want to put it in the presentation mode.
Right. Is that okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, okay. Now the thing is, how do I just use the up down arrows. Do I move from here? Yes, okay, fine. That's quite easy. Yeah. Yes, so I've been working on this area since about 2013. And what I'm presenting to you today is not just my research. I'm hoping to present the more interesting bits of research I have done. But what I have done here really is a kind of literature review. So I'm looking at many of the studies which have looked at this area, and I'm trying to give you the main points. So when we think of labor force participation, it is usually an outcome of supply and demand factors. And that is what I will be covering in this talk. I don't know how many of you know about the Sri Lankan situation. We are a population of about 22 million. 8 million are about 8.5 million is in the workforce. And generally, of course, coming from South Asia, you know that because of the expenditure on publicly provided health and education, and also culturally, the cultural environment is such that women are in a relatively better position in Sri Lanka than in many South Asian countries on average. It has to do a lot with historical factors, like the granting of universal franchise in 1931, and equal rights have been enshrined in the Constitution of Sri Lanka, and we have also signed up to CEDAW. However, we do badly in terms of labor force participation, and that pulls Sri Lanka down in the gender equality index. We do very well in education and health, men versus women, we do very well. In labor force participation, we do poorly. Generally speaking, Sri Lankan women are less likely to get good jobs. They face discrimination in wages. Even if they have the skills, same skills as men have, they get paid less. You can see I have cited the studies which have which suggest this, and I have a list of references at the end of the presentation which can tell you where to find these studies. To motivate our talk, I have graphed the labor force participation and unemployment rates from 1993. You see there are really two series. Earlier, only the age 10 plus population was regarded as the labor force, but now it's 15 plus. We have very, very, very low of rates of child labor actually. You can see the warm colors are generally related to females, the cool colors to males. And what you can see here is that women's participation rates are much lower than men's, and also unemployment rates are high, although unemployment rates have been kind of going down over the years, and that's mainly because the structure of the population has been aging for one thing, has been changing for one thing, and there has been a fair bit of out-migration as well. But by and large, participation rates are low, around 36% over the last few years. So we are, I think our participation rates is very similar to India's rates. Now the puzzle is why, of course, this is the other thing. While relatively few participate, those who do participate, their job outcomes aren't very good. You can see in this graph, in the brackets, what I have put there are the shares of both men and women of the total workforce doing that particular thing. So 47% of the working age cohort is not participating. 8% are public employees and so on. What you see in the color bars are how much of each group is accounted for by men and women. So 76% of women are not participating. In a sense, of the group who are not participating, 76% are women. Contributing family workers, of that lot, 77% are women. Only in public employment do men and women, is there a greater parity? 55% of public sector workers are men and 45% are women. So this is the situation in terms of job outcomes of women in Sri Lanka. Of course, the implications are serious. As you know, as I said before, the government has been investing in free education services. So you educate these women, and in many cases, women are doing better in the education system than men, but they are not working. So the returns to education aren't what could be. Then since women don't earn, they can't save for their old age, and Sri Lanka's population is rapidly aging. We are supposed to be the third fastest aging population in Asia, and the population is feminizing also. More women than men are living into their 80s, 70s, and 80s, and so on. So you have this situation where the population will be mostly women and mostly dependent when they are old. So that's another issue. Even in terms of economic growth, Sri Lanka is facing labor shortages, which are quite serious now, again, because of the aging population on the one hand, and there are also issues of skills and so on. So if you don't allow migrant workers also, then obviously labor shortages are going to push up your wage costs and you will become uncompetitive. So there are many reasons why women participating in the labor force is an important policy issue in Sri Lanka. And since maybe about 5 to 6 years ago, policymakers have become really concerned about this. Earlier they were more concerned about youth, because we have had at least 2 or 3 youth insurrections over employment. But now they realize that this issue of getting women into the paid workforce is a very important issue and may be a constraint on economic growth in the future. Right, so let's get to the topic. First, looking at supply side drivers and inhibitors, there was a recent study by Prathi Seneviratne in 2019. It was published in 2019, and she looked at several years of labor force survey data and identified the following factors as drivers of participation in the long term: falling fertility rates, rising tertiary education, more women were going on to university and becoming qualified that way, and declining income effects amongst the younger generation. This education thing is very, very important, because what you find is that there's a big difference between the participation rates of women who are, say, university education. Their participation is at least 80-85%, and much lower in women who are less well educated. And her study also suggests that there are demand side factors at play here, because the structure of the economy and the way economic growth has taken place, it has been really, the jobs that have been generated are really for low skilled workers. So as women are getting better educated, the kind of jobs that they would like to do, those haven't been growing at the same time, other than for the women who are very well educated. So her study looks at some demand conditions as well, but through labor force survey data. Other studies, and I have cited them down there, have identified other drivers and constraints. Of course, demographic factors like age, education, I talked about that. Household poverty, if you come from a household which is poor, then there's more of that pushes women, compels women into the labor market. Having children later rather than earlier, they also, if they're having children later, then it's more likely that they have been working previously and get back to work. And then, of course, access to social capital and networks. You know how social capital and networks play such an important role in enabling access to jobs, helping people to find jobs. So those are what we would call as drivers to participation. Several inhibitors, and a lot of the inhibitors are to do with income, household income. So if you are getting remittances from family members working abroad, then women are less likely to go to work. Generally, Muslim women in Sri Lanka are less likely to be participating in the labor market than other ethno-religious groups. Poor health and disability keep women back. That was a finding from a study I did with Ranmini Vitanagama using data just from Northern province after the war. Then, of course, education, lack of education, husbands in white-collar jobs rather than manual occupations, and of course, children less than 5 years of age. And of course, the more members, male members of your family were employed, then the less likely you were to have to go to work as well. And of course, there is this issue of social norms about women's roles and culturally appropriate employment. And that is what I would like to concentrate on in the next few slides. This is based on a study I did for ILO, which collected data from about 500 married women on time use and their preferences. So there's a lot of data on their perceptions. And it was interesting to see, and I should tell you that this survey was conducted in an area in Sri Lanka, which was relatively close to Colombo. So this was an area where if women wanted to work, there were more opportunities in terms of jobs, rather than if they were in the more rural areas, much further from the urban metropolis. So what we found in this study is that this is generally the breakdown of activities, economic activities, and this kind of reflected the national average. You can see 56% were full-time homemakers. So if you remember from the previous graph, I showed you that 36% only participated in the workforce. And amongst those who participated in the workforce, 12% were public sector employees, 8% private. There were some employed in the family business, self-employed in their own business, and 4% were unemployed. Now we asked them what they would like to do. And this is interesting because what you get on the axis, on the y-axis, these are the people. This shows what they were doing at the time of the survey. And then these colored bars, they show what proportion of these people liked to do various things. So if you take the whole sample, 20% like to be housewives. But actually, 56% of the sample were full-time homemakers. That is how you read this. Let's take the full-time homemakers. Of the full-time homemakers, 29% like to be housewives. 24% wanted to do their own business, but they were not doing it. 22% wanted to engage in a family business. 9% wanted a job in the private sector. I'm sorry, I don't know how to move this out of the way so that I can see my little gray bar. But anyway, I'm sure you may be able to see it, I hope. So those were the gray segments were the people who liked government jobs, and red, those who liked jobs abroad. Red, I mean, very few people wanted to go abroad. They preferred to stay here. But of course, the popular thing was government job. The least popular thing was private sector jobs. See, even in the private sector, only 9% wanted to remain in the private sector. Sorry, 9% wanted to be housewives, remain in the private sector. 25%. Right, yeah. Only 25% were happy to remain in the private sector. 75% wanted to be doing other things. The public sector, 37% liked where they were. They liked the government job. 9%, of course, wanted to be housewives. So you can see there are order of preferences. Most women want a government job. Relatively few want to go abroad. Very few want to go for a job in the private sector. But private sector is one of the least attractive. And in a way, it's not surprising because if you look at these women, most of them were secondary educated. If you're secondary educated, the kind of job you're going to get in the private sector is not going to be nice at all. So that's why relatively few takers. We also asked what their perceptions of gender roles were. And you can see that Sri Lankan women, I mean, men are very traditional. Women were also quite traditional. Look at this. At least 85% of men and women agreed that the woman's main responsibility was to manage household affairs and look after children. 74% of women employees thought that. 69% of both men and women agreed that in a household, the man was mainly responsible for earning income. At least 72% of men, and I think about 69, I'm not sure. I can't see that actually. How about it? Should I look on my desktop?
72%.
72%, right. Okay. Agreed that it would be best if in a family the woman was able to stay at home. Then look at the other one. How they looked at a woman's income. 92% of men and 82% of women agree that whatever women earn is extra, which helps reduce the pressure of earning on husbands. 69% of men and 61% of women agree that children are likely to be neglected and go astray if the wife works. This view was most prevalent amongst men and full-time homemakers. Then, of course, 22% of men said that they don't need to help the wife if the wife was a full-time homemaker. I haven't shown it here, but we also asked whether they think the division of household chores is fair. Men also agreed it wasn't fair at all by the wife. But still, the wife ended up doing most of the work. Of course, this has had an impact. It seems to influence women's participation. Their perceptions of the gender roles was found to be significant. So if a woman agreed that if a wife works, the children are likely to be neglected, as her agreement increased by 1 point, she was 4% less likely to participate in the labor force. You can see that these perceptions were quite influential in determining women's participation outcomes. Men's also, how they thought contributed 10% to the reduction in the likelihood to engage in market work. I think this was quite an interesting bit of work we did. Of course, the sample is small, only 500 women, but I think this may be an area for further research. And I think even in terms of econometric techniques, if you sort out identification problems and maybe problems of endogeneity, find a way to do that with a different data set, of course, which will collect information which will allow you to do that. This would be a good area for future research, I feel. And it also, you could track how things have changed over the period. So the gender division of time, not very different from anywhere else. Women spend on average around 3 hours each day cooking and serving. But actually, I have to say that I spend more. Maybe I'm not efficient at that. Maybe that's why. Women account for 2/3 of the time spent on household cleaning. Then childcare, between 2 to 3 hours a day, washing, dressing, feeding. Then 1 to 2 hours teaching, training, travel related to their school work, extracurricular activities, and so on. Now, this is just children. And at the time of this survey, I couldn't figure out whether they're, in the sense that, so the data didn't show whether they were spending much time on elders care as well. The survey was done around 2015, but now that is going to increase as the years go on, because, and in fact, it's going to become a crisis, because you find that the middle generation becomes the meat in the sandwich, looking after children, looking after the elderly. And as Sri Lanka's population ages, the elderly are also living longer. That means, and the morbidity levels are high, so they are not living very healthy lives, which will keep them independent for a long time. So one of my graduate students, she did a survey of about 800 women, again in an area close to Colombo, looking at their subjective well-being. So are they happy? She found this. Most married women say they are happy, but employed married women are significantly less happy than full-time homemakers. And it's not surprising that this is the case. Employed women have to juggle so many things, so many roles, and there is this issue of role strain, which psychologists are quite aware of. Now we look at demand side drivers and inhibitors, which are less well researched in Sri Lanka. Some of the work I did, I used labor force participation data to work out certain conditions in the local labor market. And I did that for the main analysis. I used the household income and expenditure survey to look at labor force, participation and so on. But then I worked out other conditions in the locality using the labor force data of the previous year, a different data set. And what I found is that altogether these local demand conditions account for about 16% of the probability that married women would participate in the labor force. Generally, relatively large shares of employment in manufacturing and services rather than agriculture provided more opportunities for women to work. Larger share of employed women in a particular educational category in the district relative to men. That was another factor. And then high levels of gender-based segregation in the local market. It seemed to be that if women saw that in their area there are certain industries, sectors, which are employing a lot of women, then they are more likely to participate. There's a more sort of encouraging factor there. They probably thought they had more of a chance of getting a job to which they could travel fairly easily. There's another recent study by the World Bank. This lady called, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Rupert, but there are 2 P's in it. Bulmer. She used economic census data and annual survey of industries data and looked at the demand side in terms of firm characteristics. And I have to say that now this has been preoccupying me as well these last couple of years, where I have also been involved in a study like this. There's very little work that has been done on this using firm level data. Most analysis of female, the demand for female workers and so on, they are macro level studies where, you have GDP growth and employment and all that and time series, and then they run it and see, what are the macro factors. There are factors which seem to impact on women's employment. The data is much easier to come by for studies like that. Very difficult to find studies which have used firm level data. We found only 2 from developing countries, one from Egypt and one from India, and that one from India done for the World Bank. So this is a real, this is a gap in the literature. So Rupert Bulmer used this data, and she found that the greater demand for women workers was associated with older and larger firms, foreign ownership, and sector-specific characteristics. So you have this issue of occupational and sectoral structures of production conditioning the demand for women workers. So that is what she found. Then another World Bank study used qualitative data and found issues of discrimination by employers, and basically that employers didn't accommodate the double burden that women usually had to bear. But actually what inspired me to also study this area was this other study, a qualitative study by Shamali Ranaraja and Shafinaz Hassandeen. It was a qualitative study where they interviewed fairly senior managers in 31 enterprises. And what they said was that the employers seemed to think there was no shortage of employment opportunities in the formal sector, and that employers are actually facing labor shortages and offering things like accommodation and transport and so on. What they said is that while employers had stereotypical perceptions about the capacities of men and women, there was also a view that the occupational segregation of employed women was due to prevailing socio-cultural norms rather than their own perceptions. So this was based on a qualitative data. They also found that certain provisions in Sri Lanka's labor law did not support flexible work arrangements, like part-time work, because most of the statutory entitlements were based on full-time work. There was no provision for how these entitlements would be calculated if you were not working full-time. So these are the things which they found, and we felt that this merited further investigation using a more quantitative approach. So that is what Sunil Chandrasiri and I did, and that's what we are doing. We just finished the first draft of the report, and this is a study we undertook for UN Women. Corona got in the way of the study a fair bit because we couldn't field the survey as we wanted to, and there were lots of delays. But anyway, finally, we managed to do it towards the end of last year, which is a very good thing because now we are in a third wave and it would have been impossible to do it now. So what we also found was, and not only did we look at the primary data, which we collected, we also looked at the economic census data, which Bulmer had looked at earlier, and some other years of annual survey of industries data. Of course, I guess we had more time to spend on it, so we kind of really milked those data sets in a way that I think Bulmer couldn't at that time. What we found is, yes, as Bulmer says, the occupational and sectoral structures of production powerfully condition the relative demand for female workers. It's like a straitjacket. You have your production structures, you have these sectors which are doing well or which are exporting and which need a certain kind of labor, and invariably low-skilled labor, women's labor. So the real demand for women's labor in Sri Lanka comes from certain industries like the garment sector, food and beverages in manufacturing, that's another sector, and also low-skilled work. The other thing we found was that generally in Sri Lanka, the high-skilled workers and the low-skilled workers, their skills are okay. The employers seem to be satisfied, relatively satisfied with their skills. They are not satisfied and they find deficits in middle-level occupations. So that in a way corresponds to what the supply side analysis has shown. You see, a lot of women who are secondary educated are just not going to work because they feel though they don't have the skills. So there's a big gap there which needs to be addressed. Generally, so employers, if they perceive that women lack the skills necessary for the business and that social norms prescribe the kind of jobs that they can or cannot do, those perceptions become significant influences of the relative demand for labor by these firms. We also included a variable which showed whether the respondent was male or female. If the respondent was male, and now these respondents were fairly high up managers in firms, it had a negative influence on the demand for women workers. So it seems to suggest that there are some sort of basic discriminatory and also perceptions, stereotypical perceptions probably of what women can and cannot do. Then as Ranaraja and Hasandeen found, if, employers feeling that the laws on flexible working hours and night work are constraining, those perceptions also, firms with employers who consider these as constraints are less likely to employ women. So of course, that is a good area for policy intervention. Unlike in other emerging countries, we didn't find that exports predict employment. And that is probably because exports have not been doing well in Sri Lanka for some years. That initial export-oriented drive has kind of fizzled out. And a lot of the growth which Sri Lanka experienced pre-2019, growth has been sort of stuttering along from about 2015. But even before that, the economic growth that Sri Lanka experienced didn't come from exports or trade-oriented economic growth. It came from fiscal stimulus, infrastructures, expenditure on infrastructure, and so on, which also skewed, which worked to impede export growth because of its impact on the exchange rate. So that is, though these are the preliminary findings from our study. It has to be, of course, reviewed and improved on. But we were quite happy that using econometric techniques and quantitative data, we were able to underline some of the findings of the previous studies, particularly those by Ranaraja and Hasandeen. So in this, I have kind of put it all together. And why have I got these ellipses? I really wanted to think in terms of concentric circles, and convey this idea that women are ring-fenced. You see, first you're ring-fenced within the household, those issues. So that is where the red ellipse is about. If you manage to jump those hoops, then there are these local market conditions, which also have to be favorable. And then finally, there are macroeconomic conditions, which have also got to be right. And in a recent review, Stefan Claassen, that's a very nice study, 2019, I think it was published. He passed away last year, I think. Anyway, he had reviewed a lot of studies, and he says that really the only region which seemed to have got it right is Latin America, where a lot of these conditions were favorable, worked together to increase women's participation. But this has not been the case in our region. So I think this is, yeah, I mean, I had some fun putting this together and sorting out the colors and all that. And of course, you have to remember that these conditions, whether at individual, local market or macroeconomic conditions, they are interdependent. The macroeconomic conditions can influence household level characteristics. So for instance, if you take that theory of the added worker in effect, if you have macroeconomic conditions like we have today with Corona, or some growth shock or something like that, will probably impact on the composition of household, the number of working males. You see, men may be losing their jobs, which may push women into the labor force. So all these conditions you have to think in terms of impacting on each other. But this is one way of visualizing the thing. So what would I like to leave you with? There is this issue of social norms and unequal division of unpaid work. So it makes it difficult for women to take up paid work. The job market is weighed against them. You can see that, right? So I would like to propose that for the vast majority of women who are only secondary educated, marriage and motherhood may provide a socially acceptable refuge for them. And I suggested this to an anthropologist, and she was horrified. I think it's really un-PC to look at marriage as a livelihood. But I do think that that is one way of looking at it, and one should look at it that way, particularly in traditional societies like ours. I mean, we have to think of all these theories about labor force and women's participation came up in the West after the Second World War. Okay, when women had been, oops, what happened? Right, I pressed something and it went on. When women had been pushed into the workforce anyway, right? So the theories kind of came up after that. But if you look at even those Western economies, say in the 1800s, it was completely different. Now what we are trying to do is to telescope this whole process into a matter of a generation or two. But really speaking, if we look at our societies more in sort of, say, 19th century terms, 19th century Western terms, then I think we need to factor in this whole issue of marriage. So let me express it quantitatively, right? Econometrically. If we are going to run an MLOG, we are not just having participation in the labor market and then outcomes or non-participation, participation, or this job, that job, and the other job. You really have being single, marriage, this job, that job, the other job. Do you get me? See, because especially in societies like ours, marriage, it's not just about having, another income in the family and so on. It's about social capital, connections. These are all economic resources. So when it comes to a choice, you can be married and not have a job, be married and have a job. The choices are different, but I think we need to conceptualize this whole thing in terms of marriage as also a kind of job, a livelihood. I think Becker and all these people have written on those lines, and again, that's considered un-PC. But in a way, I feel that economic theory has reached the limits of what it can do in terms of explaining this kind of thing. And we need to bring in the anthropologists, get some ideas from them. And of course, economists, we always steal their ideas and do things better, and or feel we do things better. But I really do think we need to bring in some new ideas into this in order to explain and understand the situation in our sort of societies much better, because the theories that are out there are limited in explaining the complexities of marriage and work in traditional societies like us. Not just marriage and work, marriage, work, and social protection. I mean, a woman who's secondary educated may think, it's better that I get married and then I educate my children and I run after them with taking them from one tuition class to another and make sure that they get good jobs so that, I can be looked after in my old age. Because no job that I can get with secondary education is going to give me a decent pension on which I can live in my old age. See, so this is what I would like to encourage you to think about. Now, have you watched this film, Little Women? Yeah, now what Amy says to Law, it really struck home when I watched it. If you haven't seen the film, I strongly recommend it. She tells him, don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is. And now this is Amy March, this character in this novel in the 1800s America. So I would really encourage you to think on these lines and in your future research to have a broader view of not just the culture but the historical juncture which we are in. I have written a bit more about that in my in a monograph I did on time use. So if you want to read a bit more about what I think, you may want to read the last chapter in that study. So these are the references. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer questions. I hope I haven't talked all the time. There's 10 minutes left. That's good. Okay, now I have to stop sharing, right? Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think the Little Women thing that you mentioned, I have read that book. It's about 4 sisters, if it's the same one. I'm not sure about the movie. Yeah. So that was a book I had read long back in school. And yours was a very enlightening session on the South Asian situation that we have. Firstly, I'll ask the participants if you have any questions, either raise a hand or put it in the chat box. Yeah, Satvik, please go ahead.
Maybe others will ask first, then I will ask, because I've been asking quite a few bit in last few sessions, so maybe others first ask.
Maybe I can start asking with the, so I mean, in the last YSI plenary, which held in 2019 in Vietnam, so I had, I mean, I'm more into demography and health research. So I had a paper that was comparing the age structure of Kerala, a state in India, with Sri Lanka. So as you mentioned, the health and education achievements of Sri Lanka are much better, and so Kerala is also doing in similar lines within India. So what then happens to the population is that the upper base of the age pyramid really increases, which means the elderly population really takes a. So my paper was really arguing that we should not anymore call 60 as elderly, and we should really look for other measures of elderly, and this is true for Sri Lanka and Kerala. But that apart, coming to the labor force participation of that, I mean, I have 3 questions which are particularly related to. Varsha, can you mute yourself? Okay. So I have 3 questions that are particularly related to elderly. So the first one is, what is the perception of? So you said elderly care is one of the major aspects of the employment in Sri Lanka. So what is the perception on elderly care? So if I am a person who is in charge of the elderly care, what's my stature in society? I mean, I'm generally interested. And the other side of it, which is if I am an elderly and I'm in the labor force, what is my perception? Because Western literature will tell me that being in the labor force at older ages is a good thing, whereas this is not true for India. So I want to see if that is true for Sri Lanka. Is working at old age a good thing or a bad thing in Sri Lanka from your perspective? But right now I'm working in a sociology department, though I have a background in economics. So I am a little not in agreement with the last proposition that maybe I'm wrong, that we should really look up to marriage as a job, and marriage as a place where because then my question is, what does the elderly do? So you throughout your life course you depended on your husband for your economic proposition, and now are you suggesting that since they this in Sri Lanka the women live longer, are you suggesting that at older ages now I will depend on my children for so your life entirely goes as a dependent at some place or other? So is that, I mean, not from a labor supply point of view, but from an economic independency point of view, is that what you're suggesting? But this is just my curiosity. And then the last part of my question is, we have this big database on NTTA. This is the National Time Transfer Accounts, which looks at the time use of men and women across the world. But is there something like that available for Sri Lanka also? So it's a 4-part question. Over to you. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful talk, by the way.
Shall I answer that before we go on to any others?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. We'll go question by question.
Okay. Right. Working. Well, most Sri Lankan elderly, the poor people, they continue to work for as long as they can, basically until they drop, because they can't afford not to. The government is also increasing the age of retirement in the government sector. It used to be 50 for women and 55 for men, but now it's up to about 60. Maybe women, I'm not sure about that. How people view it is, we are not like the West, where we think, yeah, as long as you can, you should work. Here it's more a question of older people have certain skills which the younger people don't seem to have picked up. That's one reason, one problem. Another issue, though, is older people are sitting there hugging the jobs, and the younger people are not getting the experience to be able to do those jobs in the future. So, I mean, I don't think we have tackled it well. In fact, I feel that in Sri Lanka, the system favors the elderly too much. Young, and you have this coupled with the usual traditional sort of attitudes where you have to listen to elders and not question them, and all those Asian sort of attitudes have also got mixed up in all this. which basically I think young people feel quite disempowered and disengaged. So I don't think people are really focused on the problem so much, but there is a problem. It's not clear how this is. These are just my observations. I didn't intend to suggest that people get married and not do anything else. What I intended to say was, in order to be able to understand the choices people make in terms of paid work and jobs, one needs to factor in marriage as well. Marriage as providing certain material benefits, which you may or may not get from the jobs that are available. I think that, whereas most studies and most of the theories are looking at marriage and it's all question of unpaid care and time use, and I mean this is all very well, but for a lot of women in our societies, marriage is providing a livelihood for them, a means of existence, which the job market is not providing. So I think that is, I feel that it is in that way that one should approach the subject, so that one can understand the choices that women make when it comes to paid work, by looking at how marriage also factors in this array of choices, and not just in terms of earnings, but in terms of social capital, social protection. Yeah, so that is what I meant. Yes, time use data. Recently, in 2017, the Department of Census and Statistics, which is Sri Lanka's data collecting agency, they added a schedule, a time use schedule to the labor force survey. So that data is available. It's a one-off thing. I haven't seen it yet. I'm supposed to be able to analyze it for another study that I'm involved in. We haven't got that data yet, but it is available. And it should be good. The DCS data is usually good. Have I answered your 3 questions?
Yes, thank you. And in fact, I mean, I am in agreement that, vulnerability is something, you said you work, the older population work as much as possible. So that is clearly a difference that South Asia provides in comparison to West, because, it's the vulnerability that guides them to be in the labor force participation rather than a choice. So, that is something that I want to know, but thank you. Yeah, it does sense.
We have Satri.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. I really like the way the framing of marriage as another option or another choice when you're thinking about when you're thinking about your future prospects, especially in societies like South Asia. And I was just wondering whether, so Sri Lanka has a relatively high level of, we females have achieved a relatively high level of education, and that is reflected in a lot of the indices and so on. I was wondering if you think that, and it's a question that I've been thinking about as well, whether, and when you say we don't see this high level of education translating into the labor market in terms of returns to education, whether marriage is also a returns to education in a sense that, in a interesting sense. Another thing that I've been looking at some marriage proposals. I mean, not for myself, just on the papers, and something that in terms of trying to extract those data, something that I really like commonly. Something I've noticed is always it's like all the male people always want educated women. Maybe they don't want them too educated, and it's the same for. So that just caught my eyes. I was wondering whether that is a connection. So you educate yourself to a certain level, but because maybe that is preferred also in the marriage market, especially in countries where arranged marriages are something are still quite common. And yeah, so I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that. So that's the first question. And the second question is regarding the feminization, the U hypothesis, and which basically, and why you think that hasn't translated in Sri Lanka's context, given that, if you look at the data from the DCS for the past maybe even 30 years, you see that female labor force participation has largely been around that 70%. And we've seen economic gains in terms of the war, as well as I think there were 2 instances where Sri Lanka progressed to a higher economic, higher income bracket in the World Bank, but none of that really kind of goes in hand with the U hypothesis, which kind of says that if you have higher with GDP growth and move out from agrarian societies, there are more opportunities for women, and you kind of see that increase. So those are the 2 questions that I have.
Thank you. Are you in Germany?
Yes, now I'm in Germany. Yes.
Yes. I know her in Sri Lanka. She used to work in a research organization, and we have met before, and I'm happy to see her here. Yes. Education and the marriage market. I have subscribed to IZA. You know IZA, that
yes.
I get some flyers about the research they do, and what I feel is that there is a lot of interest in the marriage market now, research interest, and what increases your value in the marriage market. I'm not familiar about that literature at all, but in relation to Sri Lanka, again, from what I observe, I think the majority of marriages in Sri Lanka are what people arrange themselves. They fall in love with somebody in the tuition class or something. Most marriages are love marriages. So there are the selection procedure. I don't know. That's a different topic. The arranged marriages, I think, are for the people who don't end up finding or running away by themselves. And either they tell their parents, find somebody for me, or the parents find somebody and say, you have to get settled and all that. So I think the proposals you get advertised is a small segment of that. So I would caution you about that, about the sample you're looking at, in a way. As for education, yes, I think under, and it's even in terms of, I don't know about this running away and falling in love, those kind of arrangements, whether people think of education as if I fall in love with this person, it's better educated, and I don't know how it works like that. But it is possible that you have this, what they call selected mating, where if you are more educated, you are more likely to meet more educated people, and it works that way. So that again, Sachi, is a different, I think, body of theory and literature, which you will have to look at. I'm not sure about that. But of course, there's one thing about education, I think. Now, in Sri Lanka, education is free, right? So that is why Sri Lanka, relative to many other South Asian countries, you find more women are educated. If parents had to pay, the boys would be educated, right? So that is the difference with Sri Lanka. Also, I think, apart from the fact that the government pays for it and you only have to send the child to school, of course, there are other things, tuition and clothes and all that. There is also this cultural thing of, girls have to be, they're socialized in a certain way. Now, in our language, right, in say Sinhala, that whole word is called tanpath. A female has to be tanpath, which basically means she she mustn't be giddy, she must be, staid and I don't know the word. Pardon?
Poised.
Yeah, in the sense sensible, and yeah, this being giddy is not considered, is not encouraged socially. And I think the education system reinforces that. It's girls are put in the education system, made to study. They do study better anyway. And that is a way, that one way where you block out this giddiness, and you're just schooled and socialized in a certain way. So I think education may be having that impact. But there again, as economists, we don't have the tools to look at that. And I do think that if you do get a chance to collaborate with anthropologists, psychologists, there's a lot of work to be done there. A lot of work. And I think that is the way forward, really. So that's education and marriage. Feminization and the hypothesis. The one thing, though, is that a lot of research has debunked the U hypothesis. I read recently in some recent reviews, I think the U hypothesis doesn't hold water in some analyses. So be mindful of that. There is a debate which the non-U hypothesis people seem to have had the last word for the moment. But that's as far as the theory is concerned. As far as the Sri Lankan situation is concerned, we haven't come up that U because of I think the nature of job creation in this economy. Right? So we go back to that whole the sectoral and occupational structure which favors low-skilled women. And then you have this situation where most people are secondary educated, the jobs out there are lousy, you may as well stay at home and look after your children and not pay a maid to look after them and save the money a maid would waste, leaving the cooking to her. And, the whole incentive structure is different. I actually feel that we are in this kind of no man's land. We are a middle income country with stuck in sort of a certain kind of industrial structure. We haven't moved. Our industrial structures haven't upgraded. That could be because of the war, the impact of the war, and then Corona and so on. But there is also this issue that we don't have middle level skills. Then there is an issue which came out in the study I did with Sunil Chandrasiri, where we found that employers are not very pro advanced technologies. Just sort of social media is about as much as they can manage. So in terms of our production structures also, we are not very advanced. And employers, and I have to say that it's probably the fault of my generation. These new technologies came in when we were young, and we were not confident enough to jump on it and ride it. See, so you have people now see how I didn't know how to share a screen. You have most people like me in management positions, probably sitting, preventing the younger people from, with their, more technical know-how, from driving things also. So I think there are many reasons why we are in this, this bottom of the U is dragging on. I find myself, I find it a good way to visualize it, the U hypothesis. But of course, in terms of theory and empirical evidence from elsewhere, it doesn't seem to be convincing people that it is a viable theory. But of course, you can always take a look again and examine it in your work. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Satvik, you had your question?
No, there is one more. See in the chat box. Dilshani, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned about the Latin America not getting it right. Could you maybe elaborate the lessons that could be adapted to Sri Lanka in terms of the Latin American structure?
Yes, of course. Good question. I should tell you though that I don't know much about Latin America. I only know what Stefan Claassen wrote about it. And from what I remember, he said that in Latin America, a lot of things fell into place in this way. For women's fertility levels dropped. Then there was this expansion of jobs through expansion of industry, through economic growth. And then, of course, education levels also increased. So a lot of supportive conditions fell into place at the same time. Now, in our case, fertility levels dropped. They dropped, and then we are now in a stage where there are problems at the other end. Fertility levels have dropped, and people are aging. So that window, the demographic window of opportunity we had came and went before we were able to upgrade our industrial structures, increase the skills of our workforce. The thing is, I think a lot of the time we needed to spend on getting those conditions right, we spent fighting the war. So in a way, we may have missed the bus, I feel. And now we have all these other issues of corona and terrible macroeconomic crises. So I don't know whether the opportunities will ever be right. But Latin America was lucky. And I think that is what happened to East Asia too, in a much earlier era, because they didn't have jobless growth. Jobs grew at that time, and partly due to the kind of technology they had at the time. Now you find a lot of jobless growth. So we in a way, we seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Somehow the conditions all don't seem to be, we seem to be out of step with the learning. I mean, that's all I can tell you. I suggest you read Claassen's book. It's on the web, 2019 it is. I haven't cited it in this presentation, but you can do a Google search. It's one of the last things he did. And you may find references there. I think that would be a very interesting thing to look at, actually.
Thank you, Dr. Ramani.
Yeah, Satvik, you have your question.
Do we still have time, really? If we don't have time, we officially ended. If Dr. Ramani is here, I will ask her. Maybe you officially ended.
Okay. So thank you everybody, including Dr. Ramani, for sparing our time in this. This is the last session of our series of women's work in South Asia. And it was really a non-technical session, just like the beginning session we had. So it was really enlightening, and it induced discussions on marriage and social norms in South Sri Lanka. And that's the same situation in India as well. We would like to have your presentation, ma'am, so that we can share it with others. I don't know, would you like to add anything?
No, and thank you for this enlightening talk. And as we mentioned in the beginning, we would like to continuously associate with you at the YSI South Asia. And we really look forward that much more young scholars and senior scholars like you could really collaborate with us and really build up this platform on South Asia. Thank you for this enlightening talk. And yes, I do find that there is a lot of similar stories that had come out in the webinar series from different aspects and different parts of South Asia, which really are something that economics as a discipline and labor economics specifically has to really look into. So thank you for bringing this insight from Sri Lanka. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much once again for this opportunity. I will be very happy to if any of you want to brainstorm your research proposals or something, and just use me as a sounding board, I'll be very happy to do that. That way I can also keep in touch with what is going on. Otherwise, I will have to find it all out for myself, and I will probably not know that these things exist. So please feel free to, even as individuals, if you want to discuss anything, please let me.
Sure. We'll also put your email ID. Anybody can really come and approach you with a question.
Okay.
Varsha, you want to conclude this series and then stop the recording and have an informal talk with them?
Thank you, everybody, for listening to our entire series. We have this entire session of 6 sessions of women work in South Asia available on YouTube, with the last one being today. So in case anybody has missed any session, please log on to the YSI channel on YouTube. And other videos are also there of other working groups. Please feel free to contact any of us for any queries. Thank you, everybody.
And adding to that, there is upcoming events that YSI South Asia has on several other projects. So stay tuned to our website for the new projects that are coming up. See you all. Thank you.
Thank you.